Welcome to There Is No Clash. Here at There Is No Clash, we recognise research as an independent force with the power and the authority to challenge the old and construct the new, to create an energy that will further guide logical inquiry and to contribute to intellectual and scientific progress. We don't claim to present the absolute truth, rather to introduce a systematic, critical overview applying what we refer to as reason, which according to an article in the International Journal of Philosophical Studies is defined as the capacity of consciously making sense of things, establishing and verifying facts, applying logic and changing or justifying practices, institutions and beliefs based on new or existing information.
Our line of inquiry in this programme starts with Misr, the cradle of civilization and the land of mysteries, the land where the story of Moses and Pharaoh took place. In fact, the story of Moses and Pharaoh is one of the most repeated stories in the Quran, if not the most. According to the Quran, this story takes place in Misr. The Quran narrates what Pharaoh said, "Don't I own Misr and these rivers that are running from beneath?" Moses also addresses the Israelites and says, "Descend to Misr."
Where exactly is Misr that is being referred to in the Quran, and what are its borders? Is it the current Egypt that we know now, with borders from Alexandria in the north to Aswan in the south? Well, the short answer to this question is no. This is actually not what the Quran refers to as the land of Misr, and this is certainly not its borders.
Misr means the Nile Valley. Its borders are not just from Alexandria to Aswan. Misr extends from the Mediterranean Sea all the way down to Ethiopia or the Abyssinian highlands from where the River Nile originates. These countries along this line have always been, across history, one country ruled by one king. Ancient Egyptians, Persians, Ptolemies, Romans, also the Muslim conquests, Rashidi, Umayyads, Abbasi, Fatimiyyan and Ottoman kingdoms ruled Misr as one country. These recently imposed borderlines that divided Misr to Egypt and Sudan were in place only in 1899 upon instructions from the British colony who were there at the time. This was the first and most dangerous formal division for Misr into a northern country named Egypt and a southern country named Sudan. The word Misr was mentioned 5 times in the Quran, where it came in 2 different forms. The first without nonation, meaning the homeland where Egyptians used to live. And said this who had brought him from Misr, "Don't I have the reign of Misr? You shall enter Misr." Also in another form with nonation, "You shall descend to Misran," meaning the civilized city. The reference to this civilized land, or the civilization of the Nile Valley as mentioned in the Quran, refers to the land of Egypt, Sudan, up until the Abyssinian highlands, not just Egypt.
So let's try to connect the dots here. If the valley of the Nile, or Misr, that is mentioned in the Quran covers all this land long before the British conquest and its border definition in 1899, then where exactly in Misr has been the location of Moses and the Pharaoh's story? Has it been in the north of Misr towards today's Egypt, as was taught to us in the history books, or towards the south, currently known as Sudan?
The Quran identifies the geographic location of the interactions between Moses and Pharaoh with extreme specificity, leaving no room for doubt. In fact, the Quran mentions 5 descriptions in its narration of Moses and Pharaoh's story: the western side, Yam, Madyun, Turwa and the Tor. The western side, the first location identified by the Quran, is where Moses learned from God that the confrontation with Pharaoh and his army is over. He also learned the timing of his escape with the Israelites from the tyranny of the Pharaoh. This specific location is identified as the western side of Mecca because God said to Prophet Muhammad, "And you weren't, O Muhammad, by the western side as we handled the situation with Moses, and you weren't one of the witnesses." Prophet Muhammad lived in Mecca at the time, and the western side of Mecca is northern Sudan. If anything, this tells us that the story of Moses and Pharaoh took place in what we now know as northern Sudan, or to be precise, in the southern part of Misr before the 1899 borders.
By the way, it's worth noting here that back then there was not the land that is now called North Sudan. It was known as the Nubian Kingdom of Kush. Hence you can confidently say that Misr was in Egypt, Lower Misr, in addition to Kush, Upper Misr, until now the Abyssinian highlands.
Kush was the home of people of dark skin called the Kushites, who built a strong civilization economically, politically and spiritually. In fact, the people of Kush built around 300 pyramids compared to the 60 pyramids built in Lower Misr, Egypt. There were always disputes between Upper and Lower Misr about who would rule Misr as a whole, and indeed the Nubian Kush or Upper Misr succeeded sometimes in ruling Misr as a whole. Eventually, the lower Miz, Egypt, succeeded afterwards to control the reign of Miz as a whole, and since the story of Moses and the Pharaoh took place in the current north of Sudan, or in a more accurate description, at the southern part of Miz before the border division took place in 1899. This then means that the story of Moses and the Pharaoh took place in the land of Cush, or in the upper Miz region, and that the Pharaoh that was referred to in the Quran is a proper noun for one of the kings of Cush, or Upper Miz, that is currently north of Sudan, and not Ramses II, the king of Lower Miz, Egypt, as narrated in some history books. In the Quran, Pharaoh says, "Aren't I the ruler of Miz, and these rivers are running beneath me, can't you see?" If we refer here to Egypt, Lower Miz, as we know it today, it is only one river, the Nile. Nevertheless, the Quran is referring to Upper Miz, which has many rivers. This again implies that the story of Moses and Pharaoh took place in Upper Miz or northern Sudan. The river Al-Yam, the second location mentioned in Moses and Pharaoh's story, refers to where Pharaoh sunk with his army. Another reference to Al-Yam is where Moses' mother sent him afloat in a basket when God ordered her to do so to save him from the soldiers of the Pharaoh. At the beginning of Surat Taha, God says to Moses' mother, "And put him in the coffin and throw him in Al-Yam," referring her to the river. In the same chapter, towards the end of the story of Moses and Pharaoh, God says, "And the Pharaoh and his soldiers followed them, and they've seen from Al-Yam what they've seen." So while we agree that Moses at the beginning of the story was thrown in Al-Yam and the Pharaoh at the end of the story sunk in Al-Yam, we associate two meanings to Al-Yam. We claim that the first Al-Yam is the River Nile and contradict ourselves by saying that the second Al-Yam refers to the Red Sea, where the Pharaoh and his army supposedly met their fate. Wrong. Both instances refer to the river where Moses was left as a child and the place where the Pharaoh and his army sunk beneath the waters.
It's clear that Al-Yam in the Quran refers to the same location, which is the River Nile, specifically the part of the Nile in northern Sudan. In fact, the word yam linguistically means water as a source of life and food, and it was used to refer to the Nile Valley in this region, starting from the 4th cataract to the 6th cataract. This area, Yam, is one of the most fertile areas in the Nile Valley and is now called Shendi Branch, where the Nile starts to become wider and with lower fertile banks. Obviously, you're beginning to question here, what about the verses in Quran that explain Moses crossing the sea and the fatal ending of Pharaoh and his army beneath the waters? The Quran says, "And as we parted the sea, and we rescued you and sunk Pharaoh and his followers while you were wandering."
Let's address this. The Quran was revealed in Lesson Arabic, so they understand. Arabs use the word bahra for sea, or for any large body of water like oceans, seas, rivers, lakes, etc. For example, in Surat Al-Furqan, "And he who combined water from both seas, one is fresh and drinkable, and the other is salty and not drinkable, and made between them isthmus and carved rocks." Similarly, "And the two seas are not equal. This is fresh and drinkable, and this is salty and not drinkable." The Quran here is clearly referring to the sea as a big body of fresh or salty water, whether it's actually a river or a sea.
Location in the Quran is Madian. God explains that Moses escaped from the Pharaoh and fled to Madian before he was chosen as a messenger. Moses lived in, worked at, and got married in Madian. God says in the Quran, "And to Madian their brother Shoaib."
And it is known that the grave and the mountain of Prophet Shoaib is in Yemen. This establishes that Madian is located in Yemen, not in Saudi or northern Hijaz, as it is thought to be in some history books. Madian also has the Mosque of Prophet Shoaib, which is located in the middle of Oslat al-Manar, on the line connecting Sa'na in the provinces of Ab and Taz in Yemen. The language in which Moses used to communicate with the people of Madian further strengthens the argument that Madian is located in Yemen. The Quran describes how Moses was able to speak at length with the people of Madian without a translator. Refer to the conversation as cited in the Quran. As soon as Moses reached the well in Madian, exhausted from his journey, he was taken by a scene. At this well, men were gathering, and all their focus was on giving water to their sheep and cattle. Two girls were standing modestly on the side, unable to compete with the men to get water for their sheep. He asked them, as narrated in the Quran, "What's wrong? In other words, why are you not getting water for your sheep?" They replied, "We cannot do so until the men leave, as our father is an old man." In other words, they could not go and fight with the men, so they were waiting. Moses helped them to get water. The Quran says he helped them feeding their cattle and sheep, and then he left to the shadow and said, "O God, I am thankful for all your blessings to me." Then one of the two girls came back to him and asked him to meet her father in order to thank him. As narrated in the Quran, one of them came walking modestly and said, "Our father is inviting you in order to reward you for what you've done." Moses went to meet the girl's father, and he told him the story of his escape from Pharaoh. As he came to the old man, he told him the story. So the old man replied, "Do not worry, you were saved from an oppressive people." The old man asked him to marry one of his daughters and to work with him in farming. "I want you to marry one of my daughters," to the end of the verse. This dialogue shows that the people in northern Sudan, or to be precise in the southern part of Misr before the 1899 borders, the place that Moses used to live in under the rule of the Pharaoh, and the people in Madian, the place that Moses escaped to, spoke the same language. The language they spoke is the southern Arabian language that is known to linguists as the Himyarian language. This southern Arabian language was both the language of Yemen and Abyssinia, and is also referred to as the Gears language. If anything, this explains why Moses fled from northern Sudan to Madian or Yemen, a place which shared a common language. It's important to understand here that the Arabian language can be classified into the southern Arabian language and the northern Arabian language. The southern Arabian language, or the Himyarian language, which belongs to the south, the southern part of Misr like the northern Sudan and Abyssinian highlands, the southern part Arabian peninsula like Yemen. While the northern Arabian language, al-Fusa, as the linguists call it, belongs to the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula, which is currently known as Saudi Arabia. Both languages share similar origins, and people speaking either language could perfectly understand one another. Now we agree that Moses was born and raised at the southern part of Misr and spoke the language of its people, the same language the Pharaoh and Israelites spoke. The Quran says, "And we never sent a messenger except by the tongue of his people, so he can illustrate to them the right, so God can guide whom he wants. He is the most wise." If we dig deeper into the origins of the Israelites in Misr, we ought to read the story of Joseph, the son of the prophet Jacob and the father of the Israelites. We all know that Joseph was thrown in the well by his brothers and was brought into Misr as a slave. It is clearly stated in the Quran that the man who bought him from Misr paid in the dirham, the currency used by the people in this part of Misr. Knowing which region in Misr at the time dealt in dirhams will also lead us to figure out where Joseph was sold and whether the caravan entered Misr from the north towards Sinai, coming from the Sham, or it entered Misr from the south towards Abyssinia, coming from the southern Arabian Peninsula. The region that used the dirham at that time was the southern area of the Arabian Peninsula referred to now as Yemen. This implies that Joseph entered Misr from the southern Arabian Peninsula coming from Yemen, which shows that Israelites are originally Arab Bedouins from the southern Arabian Peninsula. It is worth noting here that the dirham was also used in Abyssinia all the way up to northern Sudan. A shared common currency strengthened the trade between these places. The strong commercial ties were also attributed to the use of the same language, which we referred to earlier as the Southern Arabian language or the Himyarian language. Simply put, one language, one currency.
Had Joseph been living in Sham and sold in northern Egypt, the buyer would not have paid for him in dirhams, as this was not the currency used in northern Egypt or in Sham. Nevertheless, it is a common misconception that Joseph, his parents and his brothers arrived from Sham to Egypt, indicating that the origins of the Israelites are from Sham. The Quran says on the tongue of Joseph, and he got them from the Bedouin area. It's impossible that the people in Egypt would refer to the people in Sham as Bedouins, because Bedouins were the inhabitants of the Arabian Peninsula at that time. Moreover, immigration of the Bedouins from the southern Arabian Peninsula to the southern part of Misr was a common practice at that time. In fact, a large number of inhabitants of Yemen immigrated to the southern part of Misr, now called North Sudan, through Abyssinia, and settled there in the south after the destruction of Mareb Dam. The connection between Yemen in the southern Arabian Peninsula and Abyssinia is strong and goes back to BC. The two places shared strong ties and movements between their inhabitants. Southern Arabs immigrated to the African coasts of Abyssinia and formed their own settlements there. Also, Africans immigrated to the southern Arabian Peninsula and even ruled it several times. This kind of immigration continued until Ptolemies ruled and had control over the Red Sea. Obviously, this two-way immigration led to the unification of languages between the different nations. That's why the Southern Arabian language was the most popular language in both Abyssinia and Yemen.
Furthermore, when early Muslims emigrated to Abyssinia, escaping the oppression of Quraysh, they met al-Najashi, the ruler of Abyssinia. The companion Ja'far bin Abi Talib read to al-Najashi from Surat Maryam in the presence of the priests, and while al-Najashi was listening to Surat Maryam, he burst into tears and his companions cried as well. A verse was then revealed, and as they hear what has been revealed to the Prophet, you can see their eyes full of tears from what they knew was the truth. The key question here is, how did al-Najashi and the priests understand the language of the Quran when they were speaking Abyssinian while Ja'far was speaking the Northern Arabian language? This proves to you that the language of Abyssinia at that time was the same language being used in the Southern Arabian Peninsula, Yemen, and that the Northern and Southern Arabian languages share the same origins, and that, as mentioned earlier, the people who speak both languages can understand one another.
In summary, Southern Miz, now Northern Sudan, as known in ancient times, shared the same language with the people of Abyssinia and those of the Southern Arabian Peninsula, Yemen. This language is the Southern Arabian language. Also, the dirham is the currency of the Southern Arabian Peninsula, all the way to Abyssinia through the east and north of Sudan.
We can now understand that the immigration of Bedouins from the Southern Arabian Peninsula to Southern Miz was a common practice at that time and not limited to the Israelites when Joseph welcomed his brothers and parents into Misr. All this proves that Moses spoke the same language of the Pharaoh, and that the escape of Moses from the Pharaoh in northern Sudan to the south in Madian, Yemen, makes perfect sense.
To take this one step further, based on the previous premise, mainly that Abyssinia, Yemen and northern Sudan shared the same language, as well as scientific proof that the first Homo sapien was discovered inside this triangle, specifically in Abyssinia, where the first civilization in the world was located, it shows that the first language humans used was this Southern Arabian language.
In a nutshell, the Southern Arabian language is the oldest and first language for humans to know, and it is the origin of all other languages. The Southern Arabian language, or the Himalayan language, continued to spread from Yemen and Abyssinia through immigration to eastern and northern Sudan. And the Ge'ez language, or the Old Southern Arabian language, evolved after this into three sub-languages: the Amharic language, Ethiopian, and the Tigrinya, Eritrea, and Tikrit, eastern and northern Sudan. All these languages have significant commonalities and are written using the same alphabet.
Let's continue with the story of Moses and the fourth location mentioned in the Quran in relation to his journey. After Moses settled and had a job and wife in Madian, he stayed there for a long time, but he was determined to go back to Miz.
As he was on his way to Miz with his family, he reached the valley of Torah, where God called him, "Verily I am thy Lord, therefore in my presence put off thy shoes, thou art in the sacred valley Torah." The sacred valley Torah is the location where Moses spoke to God. This valley is next to a very high and huge mountainous structure called the Tor. The Quran says, "And we called him from the right side of the Tor and made him draw near to us." This implies that the very high and huge mountainous structure called the Tor is in the same location of the sacred valley of Torah.
The question that comes to mind here is, where is this location? Where is the sacred valley of Torah, and in which country?
Let's check the map. If Moses is returning from his family from Madian, then clearly he would enter Miz from the south, which implies he would pass through Abyssinia and the eastern north of Sudan. Indeed, on the current borders of Sudan and Abyssinia, and specifically on the Abyssinian highlands, is a valley named Tor. You can find this information in the book of James Bruce, a Scottish explorer who was the first to follow the Blue Nile from its source until it meets the White Nile. On the 29th of November 1772, Bruce arrived in Aswan and published his book, Expeditions to Discover the Sources of the Nile, between 1769 and 1773. It's considered one of the most authentic books that examine the River Nile Valley. About his trip from Ethiopia to Egypt, he mentioned a significant piece of information. He referred to a town called Al-Gadarif, a town at the border between northern Sudan and the Abyssinian highlands. Its true name was Tor. Bruce illustrates the map of Miz before the recent borders between the north and the south. On the map you can easily locate Tor next to Abyssinian Heights. From a geographical perspective, Tor, or the city of Al-Gadarif, is located in the Ethiopian hills at the border with Sudan. Rivers flow into this place and create fertile rich soils, that retain water and provide essential nutrients to plants. In fact, it's considered to be one of the top agricultural areas in Sudan, with high fertile valleys around the rivers of Atbah, State, Al-Harad and Bislam, highly known for corn and sesame all around the world. As for the animal population in Al-Gadarif, around 7 million different types of cattle come from nearby neighbourhoods seeking water and food. God describes this area in the Quran as the blessed spot. The blessing refers to the diversity of the rivers, agricultural crops, trees and food, which applies to the city of Al-Gadarif. This area and Sudan in general is considered to be the food basket of the world. There is no other area as blessed agriculturally as this area in the entire Arabian and African region, just in terms of the number of rivers, the variety of agricultural harvests and the greenery.
So what is the story of the very high and huge mountainous structure called the Tur, or the Tower, the fifth location identified in the Quran? And we called him from the right side of the Tur and made him draw near to us. The Tur is a very high and huge mountainous structure and was mentioned in the Quran as the Tur Sina or Sinai, the Tur Sanin, and just as the Tur.
It's recorded in Arabic dictionaries and scholars of the science of tafsir that Sinai and Sanin are known Abyssinian nouns. Indeed, if you check the map of the Abyssinian highlands, you will find names like Sanin, Semien, Sina, Senan. In fact, in the Abyssinian highlands you will find a mountain called Debra Sina, or Mount Sinai in English. The exact name of the mountain is also found in modern Egypt and is called Mount Sinai. You will also find in Abyssinian highlands Mount Sanin. And what's interesting is that in the Abyssinian highlands, despite the difference in the names, Sanin, Semien, Senan, Sina, etc., they all represent one mountainous structure, one range, one plateau, called the Tower Plateau. From a geological perspective, the Abyssinian highlands is considered to be one block, moulded since creation from one origin. This range is called the Abyssinian Tower, also referred to as the African Tower, because it is the biggest group of mountains with a height that extends in one chain in Africa for a very long distance, 519,278 kilometers squared. That's why Ethiopia is sometimes referred to as a tower. Even the highest peak in Africa, Mount Kilimanjaro, extends only to 4,000 kilometers squared. The Abyssinian Heights has been referred to as the African Plateau or the African Roof, with different heights exceeding 4,000 metres to a maximum of 4,500 metres. As for the Sinai or Sina mountain in modern Egypt, its average height is only 2,300 metres, and the area of Sinai altogether is 61,000 kilometres squared. Most importantly, the Sinai that you know today in modern Egypt was not called Sinai in the time of Moses and the Pharaoh. It was called Mafkat, which means the land of turquoise. Also, the so-called Mount of Tur in Sinai in modern Egypt was then called Ritho. There is no single evidence of the usage of the name Sanin or Sina for any of the mountains in the turquoise land that was later named Sinai or Sina. The Quran has to refer to known nouns with the real names as they were used at the time, and there is no mention of Mafkat or Ritho in Moses' story. What was referred to in the story was the Tur Sanin and the Tur Sina, which are known nouns from an Abyssinian origin, as documented in the authentic Arabic dictionaries and as illustrated by scholars of tafsir.
Let's get back to the terminology that describes the Abyssinian highlands as the Tower Heights. The word tower simply means the highest location from which you can see across the largest possible landscape around you. There's nothing as high and nothing as big as this spot in all of the Arabian and African region. To further simplify this, the word tower originally comes from tour in Arabic. The word tower in French is tour, in Spanish it's torre, in Italian also torre, and in German it's turm. It's clear they all come from the same word, the Arabic word tour.
Of course, this is no coincidence, because if you look in the Oxford English Dictionary, you'll find that the origin of tower is Tur. It's also worth noting that there's another name for the Abyssinian highlands, that is, the water tower. This is because it is the water source of the River Nile Valley for all this region, south from Abyssinia, north and east from Sudan, and all the way to the Mediterranean. When God swears by the Tur, then he swears by the Abyssinian highlands, or the so-called water tower, the source of the water of the River Nile, referred to as al-Bahra al-Majur, or the large body of water kept filled in Quran. Yes, the River Nile is al-Bahra al-Majur, or the large body of water kept filled. Let me clarify this one too. What is the meaning of al-Bahr al-Majur? It means the sea that gets full until it floods, and as we know, the flood is a main characteristic of the River Nile. To summarise these meanings and connections, the River Nile originates from the Abyssinian highlands, the water tower, the Tor. Each year there is a flood season, so the soil gets fed with silt. This natural flooding phenomena is what created the first civilization in history, the Nile Valley civilization. Without the flood there is no agriculture and no civilization. Al-Bahr al-Majur, as mentioned, refers to the sea that gets full and floods, thus referring to the River Nile.
As we answered before, the word al-Bahr in Arabic and in the Quran is used to refer to both river and sea. In a nutshell, the Tor is the source of al-Bahr al-Majur, or the River Nile. At this point, you might also wonder, can there be a water stream that fit the definition of al-Bahr al-Majur other than the River Nile? Well, what are the odds for a location that connects all the aforementioned dots, a location that meets the specific characteristics of the Tor Sinin, the Tor, the Valley of Tor, and al-Bahr al-Majur, as referred to in the Quran, other than the Abyssinian highlands?
In the Quran, also a tree springing out of Mount Sinai which produces fat and relish for those who use it for food. On the top of the Abyssinian highlands there is a belt of trees that extends to Senegal in West Africa. It's called the trees of sheer butter that grows only on the equator, and their fruits contain butter that has an ivory colour. The sheer butter trees only grow in Africa on their own accord without interference by humans. They're a blessing from God to the Africans. They support the people in their lives so they can use them in their nutrition, as a medicine, and to protect their bodies from the heat of the sun. The sheer butter tree is also called the tree of life. It's a source of income for Abyssinian and African women because women in Africa are the ones who gather the sheer fruit, wash and dry it, and grind the seeds to extract the butter. This tree has an extended lifespan, producing fruits for more than 400 years. Compared to other trees, this is a very long time. For example, an apple tree lives for 45 years at most. The belt of sheer butter trees covers an area of more than 3.7 million square kilometres. It's the longest belt of trees on Earth. Some Tafsir scholars explain the verse, also a tree springing out of Mount Sinai which produces fat and relish for those who use it for food, as referring to the olive tree and the olive oil that comes from that. However, there's a big difference linguistically and otherwise between oil, zayit, and butter, den. Scientifically, oil is liquid at room temperature, but butter is solid at room temperature. And if what is referred to is an olive tree, the Quran would have said which produces oil, same as God said before about the oil tree, whose oil would almost glow.
To summarise, as Moses was returning to Misr from Midian, Yemen, God talked to him at Tor Valley, that is next to the Abyssinian highlands, the Tor, at the Sudanese-Abyssinian border, which is currently called Al-Gadarif, which was the southern part of Misr before the British colonisation. To summarise, as Moses was returning to Misr from Midian, Yemen, God talked to him at Tor Valley, that is next to the Abyssinian highlands, the Tor, at the Sudanese-Abyssinian border, which is currently called Al-Gadarif, which was the southern part of Misr before the British colonisation.
Sanin and Sina, according to Tafsir books and authentic Arabic dictionaries, are popular nouns with Abyssinian origin. So the Tor, Sanin, and the Tor, Sina, are the Abyssinian highlands, the Tor that is known to be the Abyssinian tower, the source of the full flooding river, which is al-Bahr al-Majur, or the River Nile, the origin of the first civilization on earth. God ordered Moses to escape with the Israelites from the western side of Mecca, which is southern Misr, now northern Sudan, to the south, where the Abyssinian highlands, the Tor, is located. Moses settled with the Israelites on the Abyssinian tower, or the Tor. When Moses told the Israelites afterwards, go down to Misr, it really meant linguistically to go down from the top of the heights to the valley.
So moving forward, do Jews still live in the Abyssinian highlands? Absolutely. The Ethiopian Jews, Falasha Jews, or as they're also called, Beta Israel, live in the Abyssinian highlands, or the Tor, in total isolation from Ethiopian society. Even their looks are different from the rest of the Ethiopians, as they have to some extent lighter skin, because of their origins as the descendants of the Nubian Kush, who settled in Abyssinia after Moses escaped from Pharaoh in North Sudan, or more precisely, in the southern part of Misr before the 1899 border division that separated Sudan from Misr.
In the mid-1980s, large numbers of the Falasha Jews emigrated to Israel. They have their own synagogues and they live on the borders of the Arab and Muslim neighbourhoods, separating them from the rest of the Jews. Falasha in the Ethiopian language means to emigrate, and it's clear from this name that these Jews are the ones who arrived to Abyssinian highlands, the Tor, as a result of their immigration with Moses escaping from the Pharaoh. One of the main things that differentiate Falasha Jews from other Jews is that they don't believe the Talmud, and they only believe in the first 5 books from the Old Testament, which are preserved in their Ge'ez language, which is a South Arabian language. The Falasha Jews do not believe in Talmud as they believe it's fabricated, thus protecting the origins of Judaism from deviation. The Falasha believe in the God of the Israelites who has chosen them over the rest of humanity. They believe in the 10 Commandments and pay significant attention to the rules of purity, which are pretty strict. For example, the purification of women after menstruation, which follows quite a complicated process. One of the most important means of worship for Jewish Falasha are prayers, and they perform these prayers in a synagogue called Mejid. The Falasha do not enter the Mejid with their shoes, similar to Muslims, a practice that is not followed by other sects of Jews or Christians. Their hymns are in the Ge'ez language, not in Hebrew, and they pray 3 times a day, after sunrise, midday and after sunset. It's key here to remind ourselves of the first verses of Surat al-Tur and try to make sense of them. By the Torah and the book written in organised lines on an unrolled goat skin, and by the house frequented, and by the roof exalted, and by the Bahr kept filled, or the large body of water kept filled. Let's get started with and by the house frequented. The obvious understanding is that on the Tor, on the Tower Heights, on the biggest highest spot in all of the Arabian and African region, the Abyssinian highlands, there is a place of worship. On the Abyssinian highlands exists the oldest place of worship, the Temple of Yeha. The oldest standing structure in Ethiopia was able to resist earthquakes that swept through the area. The Temple of Yeha goes back to before Christianity and Islam. It was built in the days of the Prophet Solomon and is now considered to be a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Yeha temple was built as a cube, exactly the same as the Kaaba, which is not considered a typical Abyssinian building style at that time. Archaeologists in Ethiopia and worldwide consider cubical buildings to be only limited to the region of the Arabian Peninsula. It is thus clear that whoever built the Yeha temple was inspired by a similar structure in the Arabian Peninsula.
The interior of the Yeha temple is similar to any Abyssinian church or temple. It consists of 3 main parts: the place where hymns are sung, the second where the priests give the Eucharist, and the third is the sacred space called the Holy of Holies, or the Maqdas in the Ge'ez language, where worshippers place the Tabut or the Ark of the Covenant. Let's take a deep breath here and stop at the linguistic meaning of words in different languages.
Sacred or Muqaddas in Ge'ez, the Abyssinian language, means Holy of Holies, which in Hebrew is called Beit Maqdash. Since the Ge'ez language, which is a South Arabian language, is older than Hebrew, it's clearly evident that the word Muqaddas was first brought to existence in the Abyssinian temples, and afterwards came the word Beit Maqdash in Hebrew. As we just mentioned, Muqaddas is the location inside the Abyssinian temple that has the Tabut or Ark of the Covenant, whether it is the true Ark or a structure in the shape of the true Ark. What if I tell you that the Yeha temple is the actual place that used to hold the true Ark of the Covenant before it was moved to the Church of St. Mary of Zion in Ethiopia? This church is surrounded by tight security and no one is allowed to approach it except for one priest who spends his life inside and has to be a descendant of Prophet Solomon. The Yeha temple is the sacred house, Bayt al-Muqaddas, that people raised on the Tor, the Abyssinian highlands, referring to the house frequented, or al-Bayt al-Mamur, before the rise of Islam and Christianity. So what is this Tabut, or Ark of the Covenant? The Ark of the Covenant is the most important religious artifact for the 3 monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity and Islam. For Muslims it is called Tabut al-Sakina, or Ark of Tranquility. It was mentioned in the Quran in verse 248 al-Surat al-Baqarah. And further their prophet said to them, a sign of his authority is that there shall come to you the Ark of the Covenant, the Tabut, with an assurance therein of security from your Lord, and the relics left by the family of Moses and the family of Aaron, carried by angels. In this is a symbol for you if ye indeed have faith. The Ark of the Covenant is a symbol of the covenant between God and humans. It holds the 10 commandments given to Moses, in which God ordered humans to follow and preserve, whether you were Muslim, Christian or Jewish. According to the verse in the Quran, God sent the Ark of the Covenant to the Israelites, carried by the angels between earth and heaven, until it was laid down on earth. The 10 commandments were inscribed on stone tablets, which included a few things that were specific to Moses, such as the staff of Moses or his walking stick that was transformed into a snake in front of Pharaoh's magicians.
The key question here is, where is the Ark of the Covenant? Where is the chest that contained the stone tablets of the 10 commandments? Its current location is the Church of St Mary of Zion in Abyssinia, and as we mentioned before, it was previously held in the Yeha Temple, which is also referred to as Bayt al-Muqaddas. It's pertinent here to further examine the reasons we believe that the Yeha Temple, or Bayt al-Muqaddas, is the sacred place that preserved the Ark of the Covenant.
First, Bayt al-Muqaddas is an Abyssinian Ge'ez word meaning the place of worship where you put the Ark of the Covenant, the Tabut.
It's pertinent here to further examine the reasons we believe that the Yeha Temple, or Bayt al-Muqaddas, is the sacred place that preserved the Ark of the Covenant.
First, Bayt al-Muqaddas is an Abyssinian Ge'ez word meaning the place of worship where you put the Ark of the Covenant, the Tabut. Yeha Temple was the place that preserved the Ark before it moved to its current location. As for the area that is called Bayt al-Muqaddas, that we know in Palestine right now, it was not called that during the time the Muslims entered Egypt. This area was called Il-Iliya, and the proof lies in the covenant of Omar ibn al-Khattab, the second caliphate to Prophet Muhammad. When Muslims entered Palestine, Omar established this covenant with the indigenous population, which is known as the Covenant of Omar, and it has been saved until now as an official artifact that shows the tolerance of Muslims with their neighbours. In this covenant, Omar offered security and protection to all the residents of Palestine after the lands were opened by Amr bin al-As and Abu Ubaidah bin al-Jarrah. Omar wrote in his covenant, "In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, this is the assurance of safety which the servant of God, Umar, the commander of the faithful, has given to the people of Il-Iliya. He has given them an assurance of safety for themselves, for their property, their churches, their crosses, the sick and healthy of the city, and for all the rituals which belong to their religion. Their churches will not be inhabited by Muslims and will not be destroyed. Neither they, nor the land on which they stand, nor their cross, nor their property will be damaged." This implies that the region in Palestine that we refer to as Bayt al-Muqaddas did not hold such a name back then. Rather, it was called Il-Iliya. Second, Bayt al-Muqaddas in Islam is considered to be the first Qibla. In other words, the direction that Muslims used to face when they prayed before moving this Qibla towards the Kaaba. Qibla by nature has to be a structural shape in the form of a 3D cube, similar to the Kaaba, because a Qibla is a direction and a square is the only architectural shape that has the same measurements across all sides and unified angles, and can combine facing all directions from east, west, north and south. This direction exactly applies to the Yeha Temple, the same as it applies to the Kaaba. Third, and key to this argument, is that Bayt al-Muqaddas had to be present before the revelation of the verse that says, "God is the Exalted One, who took his servant one night for a visit from the Al-Haram Mosque or Masjid in Mecca to the Aqsa Mosque or Masjid." And this applies to the Yeha Temple, but it does not apply to the location that was referred to recently as Bayt al-Muqaddas in Palestine. In fact, at the time of the revelation of this verse, there were no mosques in Palestine at all. What is referred to as the Aqsa Mosque, which is in Palestine and was built in the Umayyad age. The Yeha Temple, on the other hand, is the oldest place of worship which still exists today on the Abyssinian highlands, the Tur, way before Islam and Christianity. Fourth, the region that has the Yeha Temple on the Abyssinian highlands, the Tur, is named the Tigray region. Tigray has two famous cities. One is called Adwa and the other is called Aksua. Exactly, you heard that right, Aksua. It is the capital of the Tigray region and is known as the Sacred City. On Ethiopian maps, it is recorded as Aksum. Nevertheless, the old sources clarify that this region was called Aksua, not Aksum. In the Abyssinian language, for linguistic reasons, popular nouns follow the weight of ala fa'ul. They use this linguistic rhyme in naming the tribes, countries and adjectives. For example, al-Jahbul, al-Slum, al-Sha'ub, al-Zlum, al-Ruk, al-Aksum. That's why the name changed from Aksua to Aksum. However, the real name of this region, where the Yeha temple, Bayat al-Maqdis, is located, is called Aksua. The reference to the Al-Haram Mosque or Masjid in the verse I just mentioned, God is the Exalted One who took his servant one night for a visit from the Al-Haram Mosque or Masjid in Mecca to the Aqsa Mosque or Masjid, is the region of Mecca where the Kaaba is, and obviously the reference to the Aqsa Mosque is the current region of Aksum in Abyssinian Tigray, where the Yeha temple or Bayat al-Maqdis is. This is a key point because during Isra or Prophet Muhammad's journey at night, he was not in the vicinity of the Kaaba, he was lying on his bed in Mecca. God mentioned in the verse that he started Isra from Al-Haram Masjid, referring to Mecca, not simply the mosque as we know now. That's because the word Masjid means the place that God is worshipped in the form of prostration or sajda in Arabic. It's worth mentioning that worship through prostration or sajda in Arabic is the means of prayer that distinguished Abyssinian churches and temples until today. Yes, Christians who worship in the Abyssinian highlands, the Tur, perform prostration or sajda in Arabic in worship, exactly the same as Muslims and contrary to Christian worship in the east and west. The temples and churches of Aksua or Aksum that are located in Tigray followed similar methods of worship like mosques or masjids even before the revelation of Islam. On the heights in the sacred city of Aksua, Aksum, there is a unique tourist attraction, one of the most famous churches in the world, Abuna Yamata, which is carved inside a huge rock 2,500 meters tall. It contains the oldest Bible written in the Abyssinian language, Ge'ez, which is a South Arabian language. If you are successful in climbing the mountain and reaching the church inside the rock, you will discover that in fact prayers performed in there, similar to a mosque or masjids, are through prostration or sajda in Arabic. It's also worth mentioning that the current Dome of the Rock inside what is currently called the Aqsa Mosque or Masjid in Palestine was built after the advent of Islam. It was built by the Umayyad Caliphate Abdul Malik bin Marwan in the year 688 AD.
Fifth, all the mosques in the world have been designed so that their front wall is perpendicular to the direction of the Kaaba facing Mecca. In other words, the front wall of any mosque or masjid is perpendicular to one of the side walls of the Kaaba.
Since the Kaaba is the first house of worship for people, the first sanctuary appointed for mankind was that at Bakha, which means Kaaba, a blessed place, a guidance for the peoples. Then the Kaaba, according to Quran, is the first Qibla that God made for prophets and messengers. That implies that all the houses of worship of the prophets before changing the Qibla to Bayt al-Maqdis had to be built in such a way that their front wall would be perpendicular to one of the walls of the Kaaba, and that's exactly how Yeha temple is designed. So despite the fact that the Yeha temple is the oldest place of worship standing today with its four walls in the Abyssinian highlands, the Tur, long before Christ, its front wall is directly perpendicular to the right wall, the Al-Yamani corner of the Kaaba. It's easy to see on Google Earth how the Yeha temple is directly facing Kaaba in a perfectly perpendicular way. This implies a historical connection or tie between the building of the Kaaba and the Temple of Yeha, where the Temple of Yeha is Bayat al-Maqdis and Aksua, Aksum, in Tigray, Ethiopia, is the Aqsa Mosque or Masjid, where people who worship perform prostration or sajda. These are ordered when they do tawaf around Kaaba to say, "Our Lord, grant us good in this world and good in the hereafter, and save us from the chastisement of the fire of the hell." This is when they reach the Al-Yamani corner of the Kaaba, or in other words, when they reach the imaginary line that makes the front wall of the Yeha temple perpendicular to the Al-Yamani corner of Kaaba. This supplication combines the beginning and the ending together, the beginning of humanity, the beginning of the covenant with God on the Abyssinian highlands, the Tur, and at the same time the ending on the land of Al-Mahshar or the gathering, which is also the Abyssinian highlands, the Tur. Because Prophet Muhammad said about Bayt al-Maqdis, it is the land of the resurrection and the gathering. Sixth, the relationship between Bayt al-Maqdis and Kaaba is between the east and the west. When the verse was revealed to Prophet Muhammad about changing the direction of Qibla while he was praying in Medina, he was facing Bayt al-Maqdis. He then switched his direction towards the Kaaba, and here the Quran says, "The fools among the people will say, what has turned them from their Qibla which they had? Say, the east and the west belong only to Allah. He guides whom he likes to the right path."
It's clear in the verse that Prophet Muhammad changed his direction of prayer between the east and west. This is the geographic relationship between the Kaaba, east, and Yeha Temple, west. As for the relationship between the Kaaba and what is referred to as Bayt al-Maqdis in Palestine, it's a relationship between north and south, not of east and west, as the verse clearly states. It's time for another important question. Since Bayt al-Maqdis is on the Abyssinian highlands, the tour, does this imply that Jerusalem has to be there as well? You might be surprised to know that in the heart of the Abyssinian highlands and in one of the most sacred cities in Christianity, known as Lalibela, there are 11 temples, or now churches, carved in the rocks. Together, they represent the biggest compound of harmonious temples in the world, and since 1978, they are considered UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
The age of these temples, or now churches, is unknown, but the local stories say that they started to carve them in the age of King Lalibela, who ruled Abyssinia at the beginning of the 13th century. African archaeologists and scholars, however, have proved that the carving started centuries before that, as they have found archaeological evidences and digging tools dating back to centuries BC. They were named Lalibela in the memory of King Lalibela. These temples, or churches, are structured in a totally contradictory way to other buildings in the world. They were not built from bottom to top. In fact, they were carved out from top to bottom, and church scholars say there are no other buildings like these churches anywhere else in the world. The 11 churches are connected in two different groups through passages or tunnels 11 meters deep and separated by a river called the Jordan. The northern side of the Jordan River is the location of the Church of Beit Medani Alem, House of Saviour of the World, Beit Mariam, House of Mary, Beit Maskal, House of the Cross, Beit Danagal, House of Virgins, and Beit Golgotha Michael, House of Golgotha Michael. The southern side of the Jordan River is the location of Beit Emmanuel, House of Emmanuel, Beit Kedus Mercurius, House of the Saint Mercurius, Beit Abba Libano, House of Abba Libanos, Beit Gabriel Raphael, House of Gabriel Raphael, Beit Lechem, House of Holy Bread, and Beit Georgis, House of St. George.
So what does this have to do with Jerusalem? Well, all the churches' names that you've just heard in one of the most sacred cities in the heart of Abyssinian highlands surrounding the Jordan River are the same exact names of churches currently in the city of Jerusalem. Would this make people say that Lalibela city, located in the heat of the Abyssinian highlands, is called the New Jerusalem, since it was copied from Jerusalem, or Shalem? That's not the reality. The reality, based on what archaeologists have found during an excavation, is that these buildings go back centuries before Christ. In other words, this is the old Jerusalem and not the new one that Solomon himself built, as specified in the Torah.
A unique characteristic in these temples is that waterways pass underneath them and they are always flowing and circulating. You can drink from them or use the water for ablutions while you're inside the temples. Another mysterious and astonishing fact about these temples. Archaeologists consider the carving of these temples or churches to be an impossible mission to accomplish. In order to carve these rocks, you would have needed very solid chisels made of diamond, and if you'd just worked with the basic equipment available back then, you simply would not have been able to build anything close to these structures. The Abyssinian rumours say that the angels descended from the heavens and built the temples under divine orders, and indeed, the archaeologists say that these structures are superhuman. Muslims perceive this superhuman nature in a different way. The Quran says that God helped Solomon to build the temples, and to Solomon there were jinns that worked in front of him by the leave of his Lord, and if any of them turned aside from our command, we made him taste of the penalty of the blazing fire. Since such structures are considered to be impossible or beyond the capability of man, then a better explanation is that Solomon built them because he's the one who made Jerusalem, as stated in the Torah. As for current Jerusalem, there are no superhuman temples there that would exceed the capabilities of a human in any era. The way these temples were carved in the rocks is miraculous, with every single detail shaped in a very unique way. It's interesting that all the structures and temples were built in cubical shapes carved in the rocks, and what's even more surprising is that the front wall of every single one of these cubes is facing the northeast in a perpendicular form to the Kaaba. They're all perpendicular to the Al-Yamani corner of the Kaaba, similar to Bayt al-Maqdis or the Yeha temple. This proves the verse in Holy Quran which says the first sanctuary appointed for mankind was that at Bakha, means Kaaba, a blessed place, a guidance for the peoples. These temples in Jerusalem, in the heart of the Abyssinian highlands, have been the centre of pilgrimage for Abyssinian Christians since the very old ages until now. They differ from Coptic or other Christian denominations in that during their pilgrimage they wear white, exactly like Muslims. Interestingly, they also do not eat pork, and, as mentioned before, their prostration is similar to Muslims. It's worth noting that the pilgrimage to the churches performed by the Abyssinians took place even before the revelation of Islam, because in Surat al-Fil it tells us the story of the army of the Abyssinian Abraha that was commanded by the Abyssinian king at the time to demolish the Kaaba so that people would not perform pilgrimage to the Kaaba and would stay away from it and would instead go to Abyssinia. He wanted to confirm to the Arabs at the time that Abyssinia is the Qibla, direction of prayer, and the centre of pilgrimage is not the Kaaba in Mecca that was surrounded by idols at the time. Another important piece of information is that Christianity entered all Africa, including Egypt, through European colonisation of the African continent, but Abyssinia was different as Christianity was there before Europe.
Now let's summarise a few things we've learned and apply them to what we know to make better sense of this knowledge. Since Israelites are from Bedouin Yemen, the southern Arabian Peninsula, they're a dark-skinned population, which establishes that Jacob and Joseph also had dark skin. And since Moses was born to Israelite parents, then Moses was dark-skinned. Now Bayt al-Maqdis, Jerusalem and Bethlehem are on the Abyssinian highlands where Moses settled with the Israelites, and then Jesus, who was sent as a prophet to the Israelites after Moses was born in Bethlehem in Abyssinia. This establishes that Jesus was dark-skinned, born to Mary, a dark-skinned mother. Jesus was not a European person with blue eyes, straight hair and Caucasian features, as featured in many of today's churches. It's obvious that all those prophets, including Jesus, had very dark skin and their hair was black and curly. They had a southern Arabian, Abyssinian type of feature because, as the Quran said, offspring one of the other and God is hearing, knowing. And another verse, God chose Adam, Noah, the family of Ibrahim and the family of Imran above the nations, offspring one of the other, and God is hearing, knowing. Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Jesus all shared the same language, which is the South Arabian language spoken by southern Misr, Abyssinia and Yemen. Since all the prophets come from the lineage of Adam, these are they on whom Allah bestowed favours from among the prophets of the seed of Adam. Then do not forget that Adam is the father of humanity and that scientists have proven that the Abyssinian highlands is the cradle of humanity, as they found there the very first human being to walk on the surface of the earth. According to DNA tests, they prove that the origins of humanity were black. Interestingly, the only prophet who had lighter skin was the prophet Muhammad, because he was not from the southern area, he was from the northern Arabian Peninsula. And his language was the Fusha Arabic, which was the language of the north. Can we further prove all this?
Go back to the verses of Surat at-Tur, by the Tur, and the book written in organised lines on an unrolled goat skin, and by the house frequented, and by the roof exalted, and by the Bahr kept filled, or the large body of water kept filled. And let's search in the Tur or the Abyssinian highlands for the book written in organised lines on an unrolled goat skin. You will find the secret in this book. In the heart of the Abyssinian highlands, the Tur, and inside of the city of Aqsa, now called Aksum in Tigray, the oldest Bible on earth has been discovered. The writing is organised in fine letters in the Abyssinian language Giaz, a South Arabian language, as if it was written by a typewriter, and in beautiful colours as if it was written recently. While its pages are straight and not flipped, the pages of the Bible are made from dried goat skin, or rek as it is called in Arabic. This is very significant because the skin of the goat, or rek, is an organic material that contains carbon atoms which can be recognised by radiated carbon testing to clearly identify the age of the document. According to these tests, it is the oldest Bible in the world, dating back to 330 AD, or more than 2,000 years. The local monks believe that this book holds magic properties. It has been preserved as one book without any damage or deterioration to the beauty of its writings and colours over time. Despite the Italian colonisation of Abyssinia and a fire in the church, the book is still perfectly preserved. You'll find in this book 3 important pieces of information. First, the Jerusalem temple is located in the Abyssinian highlands, the Tor. The theologians Judas Mackenzie and Francis Watson have deciphered the oldest Bible, the Bible of the Abyssinian highlands, the Tor. And while exploring the pictures in the Bible, they came across a very famous one that's present in every Bible throughout history, the picture of the Jerusalem temple. And to their surprise, this picture of the Jerusalem temple is the Abyssinian temple. The picture of the Abyssinian temple is well known for its square, wide-framed blind windows subdivided by a cross that are later found on the rock-cut churches at Lalibela. And the windows on this building are similar to Aksumite and later Ethiopian architecture. However, it's notable that the columns do not have the Attic bases used on their frames and in Roman and late antique architecture on Corinthian columns. Rather, close inspection reveals that they have plain, stepped bases. It's a unique structure to the Lalibela Abyssinian temples, and the picture included the waterways that are passing under the Jerusalem temple that look identical to the real one. Second, in this book, which has been proved by carbon dating to be the oldest Bible on earth, is a picture of Jesus as a dark-skinned person with curly dark hair, and not the Caucasian that is present in many other churches. Also, the pictures of Mary show her as a dark African woman, different from the pictures of Mary elsewhere. This piece of information is also proved by forensic medicine in a study performed by a specialist in medical drawings and forensic medicine, Richard Neve. He examined 3 Semite skulls for the Israelis using the latest in medical scanning technologies. Neve was able to depict the closest and most accurate illustration of Jesus. The illustration, as you can see, is for a tanned man with dark curly hair and with facial features similar to Southern Arabian features. So since there have never been any actual drawings of Jesus discovered, scientists are calling this the most realistic drawing of Jesus ever created. Third, the journey of the Holy Family started from the south, from Abyssinia, passing through Sudan by the valley of the Nile up until it reached Asiyut in Egypt as we know it today. The Holy Family established the first worship place, which is now known as the Church of Miriam in Deir al-Marek in Asiyut. It is not a surprise that this church now holds significant status around the world because it is the only church built by Jesus himself and is obviously considered a tourist attraction. The Holy Family lived in Asiyut for 6 months and 10 days, which is considered the longest time they spent in one place during their journey in Misr, which means Egypt plus Sudan, and until the Abyssinian highlands where the River Nile originates.
The essence of the problem is replacing Misr in recent Bibles with Egypt as we know it today. Hence, the journey of the Holy Family had to follow the borders of Egypt, which restricted the journey to start at Palestine, passing through the Sinai Desert and northern Egypt, ending in Asiyut, and a return journey from Asiyut to Palestine. It also becomes difficult to comprehend how the Holy Family managed to travel through the hardships of the deserts in Sinai and Palestine on the back of donkeys, instead of believing that they'd had a seamless journey along the Nile Valley, passing through greenery and fertile lands with abundant water and crops in their paths from Abyssinia all the way to Asiyut.
The Vatican's narrative around the Holy Family's journey from Palestine to Asiyut might not be as convincing as the story documented in the oldest Bible, written more than 2,000 years ago and preserved in the Abyssinian highlands, the Tor. This book, which has been proved by carbon dating to be the oldest Bible on earth, states that the trip started from Abyssinia all the way to Asiyut and back to Abyssinia. Precisely, it's stated where it ended at the land of Tana in the Abyssinian Tor.
The one common thing between the story of the Vatican and the one in the Bible is this place where the Holy Family stayed, in Asiyut, for the duration of 6 months and 10 days. However, if you search on Google Earth, you will find that the front wall of the Church of Mary in Asiyut is perpendicular to the northern corner of the Temple of Yeha, Beit el-Maqdis, where the Ark of Covenant was preserved in the city of Aksua, now called Aksum in Tigray. Following this tradition, churches everywhere are supposed to face the Temple of Yeha. The fact that the Bible that is preserved in Abyssinian highlands, the Tor, goes back to more than 2,000 years ago proves that it is the original biblical source. All the current translations to different languages were done from a Greek Bible, which was originally translated from the original Hebrew Bible. That said, the Southern Arabian language in which the oldest Bible has been written is way older than the Hebrew language. It is the language of the first humans and first civilizations.
Another argument that is worth reflecting upon is that in the West we use Jesus to refer to the Christ, but its true origins come from the Arabic name Isa, not from the Hebrew names Yeshua or Yesua. The name Jesus is only around 400 years old. Simply the origins of Jesus in Greek is Iesous, and this is the name written in the Old Testament in Greek. The letter J has been added recently to the English language, in the 15th century, and all the popular nouns that start with the letter I and or Y have been changed to the letter J. And that's why many words have changed from the Old to the New Testament. For example, Ursulum in the Old Testament became Jerusalem in the New Testament, Ordon in the Old Testament became Jordan in the New Testament, and Isus became Jesus. This 15th century change led to significant confusion because a popular noun should be the same in any language, so Tokyo is Tokyo in any language, and the same applies to all nouns. The addition of the letter J in the 15th century distanced us from identifying with Isus, the real name for Jesus, which in Arabic is Isa. If you transliterate Isus into Arabic, it will be Isus or Isa, but what about the extra S at the end? Well, Isis is written in Greek, and in Greek you add S at the end of masculine popular names. If a person is talking about himself, the genitive, he says his name without an S, but if someone else is talking about him, referring to him, i.e. the nominative, you would add an S, like Papadopoulou and Papadopoulos. Thus you can remove the S at the end of Isis in Greek, and it will be Isu, which is Iesa in Arabic.
That implies that Christians in the West pronounce the name of Jesus the same as Muslims, except that they cannot pronounce the letter Ein, which for them is an I, and as we've mentioned, that's been recently exchanged to a J.
As for Christians in the East, they use the name Yeshua. The origins of Yeshua are from the Hebrew scriptures referring to Yeshua. Yeshua is composed of two words, Yahweh, which is the God of the Jews, and the other is Shua, an adjective meaning the saving Jewish God. It is important to note that Yahweh is an exclusive God for Jews as the chosen people. Allah in Hebrew is called Elohim, who is God of mankind. That said, Yeshua is not a name for the Christ. Rather, it is an adjective meaning the Saviour, or to be more specific, the saving God of the Jews. In a nutshell, the West pronounces the name of the Christ Messiah, or Jesus, similar to the Muslim, while Christians in the East, they call the Christ by a completely different name that is rooted in Hebrew. While Christians in the East are more influenced by Yahweh, the God of the Jews, the Christians in the West were keen on differentiating themselves from Judaism.
There are many facts in life that we take as a given. If you ask your average Azrael, Joe or Mo about verifying these facts, they probably won't know how to. But that said, if you try to shake the history that's passed to us through generations, we can easily get offended. Our goal here in ThereIsNoClash, though, is to question, apply logic and seek authentic explanations of things that we currently take for granted. Based on our research, there is compelling evidence that Abyssinia is the land of the prophets, all the way from Adam to Isa. It is where we have Al-Tur, or the Tower Plateau, and the Temple of Yeha, Beit ul-Maqdis, or Al-Beit al-Mamur, in the Abyssinian highlands.